Well, first off, happy April. Forgot what month it was. Happy April, and thank you to the three of you for sitting down with us and having this conversation. We're really excited to have it. So this month's panel is covering how to prepare student athletes for life after sport. And I know the three of us know that this is or the four of us know that this is a very important topic, and I think this conversation will be really eye-opening and useful to coaches, administrators, even other student athletes, and anybody who's in that kind of sphere to help student athletes transition into life after sport, whether that be graduating from high school and not going on to play in college, or graduating from college and going on to professional life and using your degree and different types of things. So we can start, and everybody can go around, say your name, your position, and kind of why you're an advocate for mental health, and why advocating for preparation for life after sport is important. So, Madeline, if you want to start us off.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. As you just said, Mary, this is such an important topic to me for many reasons, definitely stemming from my personal experience with my transition into life after sport, just being a really difficult one to put it to the very least. But currently, I am the mental performance coach at Drexel University. I've been there for 5 years, working with all of our athletes across every team. In addition to, over the last few years, starting my own business called Mindwise, and now also being an advisor for the hidden opponent in regard to the sports psychology, mental health aspects. So I'm super excited to be here because, mental health is what is always a part of us. It's something we cannot separate from. And while being an athlete is a choice that we make at one point in our lives, which is a great choice, it's an exciting and fun choice. There comes a day when it ends, and you are a human first and foremost. And that is why I find this topic to be so important.
Love that. Erica, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Erika Olivarez, and I'm a mental health therapist and also mental performance coach. So I blended the both worlds to be able to really just pay attention to how important mental health, mental wellness is in all aspects of athletes' lives. I think for me, on a personal note, I don't have the athletic experience being in a collegiate, being a collegiate athlete or pro athlete, but for me, it came from a family member. So seeing what happened in his experience and seeing, what evolved from, not having the support system in place. And so that really just, of course, as a mental health therapist, just the why and that question about what needs to happen and what needs to be in place in order to help our athletes who are individuals who are cousins, sons, human beings that are figuring out this whole role in their life. And so I think transitions and this topic of transition is so valuable in all aspects. So I'm excited to have the conversation. I appreciate the invitation, and I look forward to hearing what comes of this.
As do I. JoAnne, if you want to round us off here.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm really excited for it. I work full-time at Rowan University. I'm an assistant professor in the Health and Exercise Science department. And my primary area that I teach in is sports psychology. Another role that I take on at Rowan, which is one of my favorite roles, is serving as our NCAA faculty athletics representative. And over the course of the past 5 or 6 years since I've been in that role, that's really where all my research has resided. That's where I am looking to put together programs to assist our student athletes with their well-being and their mental health. And that's kind of coupled with my other job that I have where I run my own performance psychology business. I'm a CMPC, a certified mental performance consultant. And I just see kind of, being a former D3 student athlete and transitioning into life after sport was a big unknown for me. And I wasn't as prepared as I thought I would be. So kind of being able to give back to them and provide them with innovative programming is really what I'm passionate about. So I really look forward to talking with all of you tonight.
Amazing. So something the three of you kind of touched on in different ways was the fact that we're talking about human beings here and that this process is so unknown. And I know for myself as an athlete, and obviously you guys can touch on this in different experiences, but I know for myself as an athlete, I didn't know that there was such a transition until the transition was happening. So why do you think it's important for athletic departments and coaches to help prepare student athletes for life after sport? Why do you think this is something that needs to be talked about before we even talk about how to help? So Erika, if you want to kick us off.
Sure. I think you nailed it, Mary. You said, to begin that conversation is so important, to have that dialogue, be so familiar to the athlete and be able to have such a comfortable conversation in understanding that transitions happen in our life, no matter athlete or, post athlete. Once you're out in the real world, life is full of transitions. And so we have to better prepare ourselves from the beginning. So I can even go as early on as middle school athletes, and just be able to understand that once you are familiar with being able to know what transition is in life, then you're better prepared when you're faced with it. So as far as having the athletic organizations prepare their athletes for this topic, it needs to be just as a topic of conversation as it is your training. So being able to bring it up in the curriculum, in the training, and have it be familiar to them.
I love that you touched on just making it a familiar dialogue and that transitions are a part of life. I think that's something that a lot of us kind of don't like to acknowledge because transition can be uncomfortable and change can be uncomfortable. But I think that's a really important thing to recognize. JoAnne, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I agree with everything Erika said. And while you were talking, Erika, I was thinking about just normalizing, right? Like, how do we normalize that all of our athletes are going to be going through this, and there's no like incorrect way to go through the process, right? Every student athlete's experience is going to be different, but they should know that while they're going through the process, they're not alone. So like tapping into, and I know we'll get into this, but like the resources on campus, even before they leave, and knowing what they have access to is something that they need to be aware of, because many times they may not know really that there are so many people to support them and prepare them for that next step.
And I feel like you touched on the resources and using them. I think a lot of the times athletes don't understand fully the resources that they have until something happens or until kind of later in their careers. So I'm excited to kind of weave that into conversation too as we go on here. Madeline, anything you want to add here?
Sure. So obviously want to echo everything that was just said because it was said so eloquently. But the one thing that comes up for me is about something that may stand in contrast to what I talk about very often with my current athletes, which is practicing presence, right? And what we're talking about here is about being more mindful about your future, because I think there is a way that we can do that, and that we really should do that. It's important to be to actively plan, but doing it from a place of presence at the same time. So I think rather than letting people kind of figure it out on their own, oh, they're flying the nest and off they go, but then there is a lot of that uncertainty. It's about really helping them to create that plan while they are in a situation at school, having that foundation, so that way when they do fly the nest, they feel more secure in that plan and in taking action with all of the tools that they now have.
I'm excited for that to weave into the resources part of things too. So we've talked about why it's important, and I know that we all know that it's important. So I think the harder part of the conversation can be, well, what can coaches and administrators actively do about it? So what are some ways that the three of you can kind of think of or know of that you've experienced that coaches, athletic administration, departments, schools as a whole, or whatever it may be, kind of prepare student athletes for that transition into life after sport? And what are some ways that you've seen be more effective than others? Dr. Bullard, if you want to start us off.
Absolutely. So on our campus, we've actually had a program running since 2018 called Prof Academy. And it's a program that is built off of career preparedness for transitioning to life after sport. And we're fortunate to receive grant funding. It went great. And then COVID hit. So this is actually our first year kind of bringing it back since COVID, and we're wrapping it up. But our whole focus and our whole goal was collaborate with what already exists on campus, have the conversations, because a lot of other departments on campus might not truly understand the uniqueness of student athletes and what they're preparing for, or what they might be concerned about with transitioning into the future. So that's where I think administrators can really come into play and sit at the table, with other departments and really talk about the needs of what they, see with their student athletes and how this potential department could help, right? And sort of, again, utilize and make sure that these resources are connected for our student athletes, so that way they know who to talk to, what help they could receive. And it kind of is a ongoing conversation, not only when you hit, senior year, but it's something that when you come in as a freshman, that these programs are available. And you might not be thinking about life after sport, your freshman or sophomore year, but you'd be surprised how many sophomores have jumped into our program to already start that process of understanding like those next steps. So I think collaboration is a huge piece of the puzzle.
I love that. And so, Madeline, if you're thinking about collaboration, what role can coaches play in that collaboration? Since they're with their student athletes every day, day in, day out, they know their student athletes pretty well. How can they kind of have a hand in this while they're managing their teams and managing different aspects of that?
Sure. Yeah, I was going to go into that like interpersonal relationship, right? So really considering just the language coaches use around life after sport, around transition, around their athletes being humans. I know I brought that up just a few minutes ago, but I'm probably going to bring it up every single time I talk because it's so important. And really helping them to see themselves. So coaches helping their athletes see themselves as the human that they are, because sport is what they do. It's not fully who they are. And so I think that's a really important component and something for coaches to keep in mind, is that identity piece and helping them to establish an identity outside of their sport, which I'm sure for some coaches may be a little scary. The idea of being anything but an athlete and being anything but present with themselves at practice and doing what they need to do. But at the same time, I've found in my research and others in their research that making space for other interests is actually going to make more space for you to be more effective and more present when you are training. So helping them to establish those interests, those identities, those roles outside of their sport as well.
I think the identity piece is huge. I remember as a student athlete, I used to joke, I am softball, and I didn't realize until after I graduated how true that kind of was. So Erika, kind of in thinking of the same, in the same lines of how we can support our student athletes and how coaches can, are there any specific areas that you think maybe because their time is so involved with athletics that they may not have the same kind of time management to take advantage of those opportunities? Like if it's leadership development, financial literacy, any of the kind of things that we think of as like adulting skills. Are there any of those skills that you can think of that could also be weaved into how coaches and athletic administration kind of supports their student athletes?
You read my mind. So that is exactly what I wanted to just put out on the table, that in a perfect world, we would love, love, love to be able to have the coaches, touch on these subjects with each of their individuals. But in a realistic world, they don't have the time. They don't have that ability. And bottom line, there's not resources. I don't want to be the Debbie Downer here, guys, but I want to be real in the situation that, I love collaborating. I think that's so important. And I find that that's such a huge piece for us to be able to know what else can we do for our athletes? What else can we do for for these young adults that are going to be facing the real world and coming out into, reality checks here soon. So, the conversations need to happen. Again, the awareness, the education. I think, if we can think outside the box to be able to tap into some of these resources and collaborations that can come into place to be able to fulfill these real life skills that we need. And just as you mentioned, life skills, exactly what needs to happen so that we're able to really encourage the individuals to understand what their interests are, what their strengths are, what their values are, what is it that they're going to be doing for themselves now while you're in sports, and figuring that out so that it'll propel you and help you as you're transitioning out. So I think, start for us, I think the beginning is for us to start to think creatively so that we are not putting all of this all on the coaches, putting it all on, the administrators. I think, hopefully those conversations can come out and we can figure out, that there needs to be a system in place.
And I think you touched on a good kind of point that segues into our next kind of question topic. The fact that, coaches don't have time to think of this all on their own, and collaboration is such a huge effort, and everyone kind of touched on it there too. So me as a coach, or any coach could be thinking, okay, well, this is a big transition. Like, I know it as an athlete, it was a big transition. So how can I effectively help my student athletes manage this as they go through? Like, wow, that's a big task. So what are some kind of smaller things or some more manageable kind of aspects that coaches could do every day, every week, whether they implement it into practice or a check-in or something of that nature, with their either seniors or their upperclassmen or anyone who's getting ready for that transitionary period, to help them prepare for life after sport? Madeline, if you want to start us off.
Yeah. So I wanted to highlight first really quickly what you just said there, which is oh my gosh, that's an overwhelming big task. And, I think we flash back many, many years. At one point or another, coaches were pretty much responsible for doing all the things, for being all the things. Nowadays, that's not the case anymore, because we do have, not always the most resources, but at least, even like a mental performance coach at some universities is few and far between, but it's amazing when we do have it. And it is something that's different than in the past. So a coach no longer has to take on that role. And so I think first and foremost, it would be really great for coaches to even just on their side of things, establish a list of the resources that are available at their university. Like, make it easy. Always make it easy for yourself, rather than getting into a conversation with someone and really not knowing or not feeling like they know where to go either. So starting by making that list, putting it somewhere where they can easily access it, easily print it off or send it off to their student athletes. And then when they are having those meetings, because we know coaches meet with their athletes quite often, to whatever extent, doing those quick check-ins, bringing a little thing up, or even just connecting with their athletes about some of those interests outside of their sport. Like, hey, I remember you telling me you tried out, I can't believe this is about to come out of my mouth, pickleball. Like, I don't know if anybody knows what pickleball is, but that's like a new thing. And I'm like, oh, if you know that about your athlete, just check in. Hey, have you been able to do that? Or what's that been like? Or whatever it is, right? Just little moments of connection, I think, is really valuable. And also that becomes a reminder as well of some of the things that individual likes outside of their sport.
Erika, do you have anything that you can think of, any different kind of manageable or small kind of ways that coaches can help their athletes prepare for the transition?
Yeah, I definitely like that idea of connecting with the individual. I think that's so valuable to be able to trust, your coach as it should be the fundamental piece of working with the individual. So, having the trust and be able to start to transfer that into, finding another key person that the individual can find that they can trust in. And, the one thing that I feel at a young age, whether it's a collegiate athlete or, younger, I feel that the mentor or someone that they can look up to or have that connection with, I feel that that's, something that is in place that can help them feel like they're supported. And as an athlete is on a team, that's what they know, that's the language that they speak. They relate with others that understand them, and so having that team approach, being able to have someone to support them, such as a mentor, I think that would be an older or already postgraduate student that they can reconnect the student with. I think again, thinking creatively and outside of the box would be helpful for the student athletes to feel like they are supported.
And you both talked about connectivity and kind of trust, and I think sometimes as coaches, we can overthink that a bit. The basis of coaching is building that connection and building that trust. So I think, if you have an athlete for 4 years or however long you're working with them, and you get to that transitionary period in their life, you've built that connection and you've built that trust so you can have those conversations. So it doesn't have to be such a big kind of thing. JoAnne, do you have anything that you can think of that are more manageable, small things that coaches can kind of add into their repertoire to help athletes with this?
Sure, absolutely. And I echo what was just said, which are all amazing tips. The only thing I would really add in would be, the coach sharing their experience and what they went through when they were going through the process. Sometimes it helps to, I feel like I've already said normalize, and it might help the athlete be like, wow, I didn't realize coach felt the way that I'm feeling right now. Okay. Like, all right, if they got through it, how, and when that trust and rapport is there and that's built, that's an important piece, right? But it might help them understand that, you're not alone in this process. And then to extend off of what Erika was saying, the big piece with connecting with mentors is really important. And that's what this one program I mentioned before, we do. We bring back former student athletes for like a networking night, and they share their experience, and we have roundtable discussions, and it's amazing what the student athletes do walk away with, just understanding like, wow, like even just what was that first job interview like how did you shake hands, right? Like what questions were you prepared to answer? Were you nervous? Like it just helps to create that sense of like, we're all here, we're all supporting each other, but we're all going through it at the same time.
And I think even to add to that too, coaching, I've seen, alumni graduate, and whether they played on the team with these student athletes that are getting ready to make that transition or not, you can always reach out to your alumni to ask them if they're in that field, if they're going into teaching and you have someone who's graduating with a teaching degree and they've been through that same process, or they've been through whether they have tests to get into grad school or whatever it may be. There's a very wide kind of range that your student athletes have been through, past and present. And so that can really help your current student athletes with that transition.
Can I add something really quickly? I think that's so important, as you mentioned, JoAnne, the support system and having that in place, especially with the social connections, if they've had that support system all throughout their career and then all of a sudden it's cut off. And how scary is that feeling? Just not knowing, where to turn, where to go. It's something that I think is such a valuable conversation, to be able to know what's going to be in place for that support system once they leave.
And that kind of reminds me of something else that was touched on too, is it's not just about mentorship and connection and all of that, but you mentioned that your team is there too. You've been on a team and you have other teammates who are going through the same transition at the same time. I know for me, that was a huge thing. I had one of my best friends and I were going through the same transition. We graduated during COVID. And so it was definitely good to know that we were going through the same thing together and we could talk about that experience together and know that we weren't alone. Because like you just said, it can be isolating to kind of go from athlete to not having that same kind of structure, schedule, and that kind of setup anymore. So I think that's a super important part of it too. So the kind of next topic that we want to touch on is who should coaches and athletic departments look to collaborate with or what should those resources look like, or where should they look for those resources, whether it's on campus or off campus? So JoAnne, what would an on-campus kind of search for resources look like?
So on campus, who you could pull from would be, I think, first and foremost, like speaking to your faculty athletics rep and seeing what their views are with this, who they are already connected with on campus too, right? That's another resource. That's another outlet that you can use to make these circles larger. But other individuals, we have a very tight relationship with the Office of Career Advancement. For example, so we bring them in a lot to teach how to dress for an interview, or to like how to shake hands, how to write that resume and go through that review process. And we even provide them with mock interviews, so they have that opportunity. And it's really awesome when they come back and they're like, I had my real interview when I felt so much more prepared. Like I wasn't shaking as much. I didn't like stutter as much. I felt in control. And then you're like, awesome. That's a win. Other offices would be Student Support Center, the Wellness Center, reaching out to the psychology department for assistance if they have somebody, that's in the field and understands like student athletes, and maybe like we bridge with somebody whose research is on mindfulness, and they'll provide, workshops. Alumni, the alumni office is a huge office to connect with, because they'll be the individuals who can tell you where your other graduates are, and where they're located. And I think I already said student success centers, but they would be another piece to consider.
So with all of those resources, and obviously different universities and different places have different resources available, if you have to look off campus, what would some of the resources that you'd be looking for kind of look like? Madeline, if you want to jump on that.
So this one feels like a bit more difficult to answer. Not that it's not difficult to find the resources sometimes within a university, because they're all going, like you just said, every university has different availability, different options. But off campus, I mean, nowadays, I really think a big thing comes down to social media, which is kind of a wild answer for me to be giving. But it's honestly how I connected with a lot of people that are working in the life after sports space throughout the pandemic in particular, was through Instagram. So I don't even know a lot of them in person, but I've connected with these professionals pretty deeply at this point, including the hidden opponent. That's how I became connected with you all, is through Instagram. And so using really those search terms, and obviously being careful, because it is the internet still. So having, pretty high awareness, and background check seems very professional, or, formal, but still like really looking into those spaces, looking at their websites, connecting with them virtually, speaking with them, finding a person or a organization that you connect with that shares a similar mission or goals. So like I said, the hidden opponent is one for me in particular. Athlete's Soul is one that I work. I'm a transition coach for Athlete's Soul, which is also a nonprofit for life after sport. Fantastic organization. So looking for things like that, people like that with the background experience, and again, similar missions and goals.
Funny side note that you touch on that, because that's actually how I was brought to the hidden opponent too. Was I had just graduated through COVID and didn't really know kind of what that transition would look like, and I was debating my 5th year whether I was going to take it or not, or move on from the sport. And I watched the THO webinar and I was like, wow, this organization's like, I don't hear anybody talking about this. So, and obviously we have a lot more resources now, and I think it's a bigger part of a conversation, which is obviously very good. But yeah, definitely echoing what you just said, Madeline. Erika, are there any other resources that you can think of, or any particular kind of organizations that you think would be useful to student athletes and coaches and professionals?
Yeah, definitely. So, again, kind of looking at from, the micro level and kind of working our way outward. And I think, just starting local and finding out who are the providers in your community, reaching out to the, collaborating again with the universities and figuring out, what are those connections that can help bridge that gap for the support services and resources for the individual. And then just working your way out. I think, it's funny that we are now utilizing social media as our outlet, but it's, good and bad. And so obviously for the positive, I think, as we have connected here, it's such a valuable resource that we can find those connections that we are, like-minded and out, fulfilling the same purpose and goal. So I think, social media is again, a really great resource. LinkedIn, I think, has been my number one way of finding those right resources and professional resources. The one that I want to mention for professional athletes and former football players is the Hall of Fame Health. So they're a really great resource to be able to access services. So behavioral health services for former professional football players and their families. And so for them, the resources, if they cannot afford it, the resources they've got, the financial support as well.
And I just thought of something while you were talking about kind of collaborating with schools and local providers. I think something that we may not take advantage of enough is things at the conference level. So if your school doesn't have certain resources or certain things that your student athletes may want through that transition, you can collaborate with other schools in your conference or in your division or whatever it may be. There's a lot of ways that our schools are kind of close knit, whether it be by conference, by geographical area, whatever it is. There's a lot of resources that can be shared because, like we've all been saying, we're trying to do the same thing and look out for our student athletes as they transition here. So in looking out with our student athletes as they transition, how often should coaches check in on recent grads, and what kind of do you think that should look like? JoAnne, if you want to start.
So that's interesting. To be honest, I mean, I'm not in a coach role in that sense, but I would think, if a coach is, I guess this kind of comes back to the whole concept, like when we're talking about student athletes in college being proactive instead of reactive, right? And preparing for this transition, then it's really if the coach is carrying forward with that mindset, like if we can be proactive, especially in those beginning stages. Like, I don't know about all of you that transitioned out of sport into the quote unquote real world, but I remember I was like, what do I do in the gym? Like how do I work out? Like, what am I supposed to eat? Like all those little pieces that I was like, is there really something wrong with me? So maybe it's sort of like heavier in contact, whether it be through a text message that the coach is just sending out text messages individually, or if the group was very connected, team-based and very open, talking about it before exiting sport, maybe they've already put together some type of a group me or a text chain or something like that, where they set up time just to be involved with each other and stay connected. But I would think the earlier you do it is better. And then gradually over time, like it might wean down, but at least that athlete knows that they still have a support system in place for them if they need to lean on them.
And kind of going with that support system, I know we can talk about like alumni relations as a kind of this conversation too. But Erika, what do you think about how can coaches keep recent graduates engaged with the program so that transition doesn't feel like such a hard stop, like you're an athlete today and tomorrow you're not kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. I think, the thought, just as you're talking, JoAnne, listening to that conversation about, bringing them back into, as an alumni and utilizing their experience as a mentor. And so I'm going to go back to that conversation about, utilizing their experience so that it can help those younger athletes understand what has happened and what has gone on. So, yes, of course, staying connected with those athletes that might have had a difficult experience or more challenging and needing that extra support, being able to reach out to them as often if they are capable of, and or bringing them back to the field.
So I have one more question for each of you that I want to wrap up with. I'll start with you, Madeline. If there was one thing that you could tell yourself before transitioning into life after sport to be more aware of the process and the transition, what would you tell yourself?
You had to drop a really big one on me, didn't you? Oh yeah, this is a big one. Take it one day at a time. I'm gonna keep it really simple. Take it one day at a time. Don't look too far ahead, but plan. Reach out sooner. Reach out in general. Find that support that you feel you need and you want. Period. In there.
JoAnne, if there was anything about the transitionary period that you think, or that you would have liked to know as an athlete, or if there was a certain part that was the hardest, whether it be opening day for your program the next year, or seeing them go on their spring break trip or whatever it was, or senior day the next year, whatever that kind of moment was, were there any moments where that were harder for you?
Or when they won NCAAs the year after I graduate, maybe that one. No, I think very similar to what Madeline said, patience, being very patient with myself. That's something I had to learn to be forgiving, like self-forgiving, and recognize that things weren't going to happen overnight. And I think, that also clicks into that athlete mindset where we're maybe a little bit more resilient, a little bit more that achievement motivation. We're like, go, go, go. And it might not be like that. So to recognize, to trust in the process, be patient, and, lean into those support systems, I think would be really, really important elements that would have helped me along that way.
Agreed. And then Erika, bring us home here with this one.
Sure. Go ahead.
If there was one thing that you could tell an athlete as they're ending their collegiate or high school, whatever their transitionary period is, ending their career, if you could tell them one thing looking back on their career and one thing moving forward, what would you tell them?
Mm-hmm. So I think, what stands out is that they are more than just an athlete, just focusing on, that transitional moment in their life, that they are more than this, that they come with so much more, and be able to overcome any of those challenges, overcome any setbacks, any life situations. And so what does that mean? Being able to learn from the experiences and be able to move forward from any of those setbacks.
I love that. I love it all. So unless the three of you have anything else that you want to add, feel free if you'd like, but if not, that's all we've got. So thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. I'm excited for this to be shared with our community. I think it's, as we've all said, a very important topic that isn't talked about. JoAnne, like you said, being proactive versus reactive isn't talked about in a more proactive manner. I think we're pretty reactive about it. So hopefully now we can start to have that conversation sooner and prepare our student athletes for this transition. So thank you for being here and being a part of this conversation, and have a great rest of your night.